Escape from Tarkov is a Russian everyday life simulator currently in beta. The basic gameplay loop involves emerging from your underground hole to find vodka and fresh batteries for your Tetris handhelds. Your main obstacle are other drunk, bloodthirsty Russians who will stop at nothing to kill you and steal your supplies. Tarkov has two distinct player types. There are people who play it like a competitive shooter, using the best weapons and armor they can get their hands on, aka the Chads. Then there are people who play it like a survival game, bringing in minimal gear, avoiding combat as much as possible, and picking up the scraps that other players leave behind, aka the rats. I am a rat, I have no problem admitting this. About half of my raids involve bringing in nothing but a pistol and a backpack, evading other players, and escaping with as much loot as possible. Unfortunately, in typical Chad fashion, many Tarkov players have large dicks and small brains. They have no problem with chasing you across the entire map in a testosterone-fueled lust for violence, wasting resources many times more valuable than your entire pathetic rat loadout. Okay, there should be a staircase on the west side. Not 100% sure. And I feel like I'm gonna get shot in the face any moment. There's people with big boy guns all around. Yep, there's one. Is he a scav or was he a... Let's try to get forward. Nope. Ooh! Okay. Well, I am screwed. Ah, I should just die, just fall over dead, because there's nothing I can do. Why is he like... Grenade? Yep, nothing I can do. From this point on, I'd like to make it clear that I'm not very good at Tarkov. I only have about a 15% survival rate and about 80 hours in game, so please take everything I say with a grain of salt. A lot of what I talk about is just my personal experience as a new player and might not reflect what the game is really like once you have 1,000 hours of experience under your belt. So let me back up a little bit and explain the core mechanics of the game. I can see noticeable influences from various games, but Tarkov is different enough to be in its own unique genre. The game is broken up into smaller zones. Some of these maps are very small and seem more oriented for people who want to jump into fast-paced PvP. However, some maps are more reminiscent of something like DayZ's Chernarus, with small loot areas strewn sparsely throughout giant fields. If you ask me my favorite map, I would probably say Interchange. It's a massive multi-floor shopping mall filled with a variety of stores, all of which are fully explorable. What makes this map so much fun is just how diverse the loot is. Do you need building materials to upgrade your hideout? Then you can go to the hardware section. Do you need computer parts? Then go to one of the electronics stores. As you sneak around the decaying, dimly lit shopping mall, you know that around any corner could be another player ready to kill you and take what you've looted for themselves. It almost makes me think I'm playing a horror game. One of the greatest features of Tarkov is just how detailed all the maps are. No two buildings are quite the same, and every inch of the game feels real and lived in. I don't think I've ever gotten quite so excited about garbage being on the floor before, but it's just so detailed. Even the game's animations are so intricate that I often find myself enjoying just watching my character eat, or staple his bones back together. Each map has entry points and exit points, and a time limit that you can spend on it. You spawn into each raid with a handful of other players, and the general goal is to make your way to an exit with as much loot as you can find. If you die, you lose everything, including whatever you brought in with you. If you survive, you can deposit your items into your hideout, where they remain safe until you decide to bring them into another raid. At its core, the game is about risk and reward. You can risk relatively little by bringing cheap gear into a raid, but you'll be relying on stealth and map knowledge to survive. Conversely, you can bring in powerful guns and armor, but then dying becomes a huge setback. Most maps are designed to encourage PvP. On Customs, for example, about half the players spawn on the west side of the map, with extraction points to the east. The other half spawn in the east side, and you have to make your way west. In the middle of the map are several choke points designed to funnel players together. You will almost always run into other players during a raid, and the game achieves this in a very organic way. The game isn't just about PvP, though. You can generally avoid the high-traffic areas and farm the questionably intelligent AI enemies for experience and loot. Is this guy a real... Is this guy
That's a scav.
He said...
Yeah.
He flipped us off and then ran into a fucking barbed wire. That was
What a
fucking weird. Why did he
Chad.
flip us off?
They do that.
There are even boss AI characters with high-level armor and weapons, all of which you get to keep if you kill them and make it out alive. I had always heard about Tarkov in the context of a hardcore realistic shooter, but I was surprised to find just how many RPG mechanics are in the game. There are NPCs you can buy and sell items to, tasks that function as quests to improve your standing with said NPCs, as well as gain items and experience. On top of having an overall level, which unlocks features and more items available for purchase from the NPCs, there are also a number of skills that you level up by performing various actions in the game. There's even a flea market where you can buy and sell items you found to other players. But one of my favorite features of Tarkov is the Hideout, a base of operations for your character that you can upgrade to gain various passive effects, as well as use to craft items. While Tarkov can be described as an MMO FPS, the game is very different and much less casual than other popular games in that genre. There aren't many mechanics that remind you you're in a game, and the moment-to-moment gameplay feels much more like a military sim. For example, you have to manually check how much ammunition is left in a magazine. On top of that, ammo doesn't automatically consolidate. You'll have to manually repack your half-full magazines. Health and healing is interesting in this game. Each section of your body has its own health pool, and your character is capable of taking different kinds of wounds that require different kinds of treatments. A lot of your survivability revolves around how prepared you are with medical supplies you bring into a raid. If a limb's health pool is drained to 0, you can't heal it anymore, and you suffer a penalty. If your arm gets blacked out, you're going to have trouble aiming. Legs, you're going to have trouble walking, and if your chest or head hit 0, you die. If a limb with 0 HP continues to take damage, the damage is spread across the rest of the body. This allows for interesting encounters where chest and headshots might not always be your best option.
There you go.
Overall, I think that the health system has a good balance between being realistic and being intuitive. On top of finding ways to keep your blood and organs inside your body, you also have to worry about becoming dehydrated or starved. If you plan on sitting on a hill for 40 minutes sniping people, it would behoove you to bring some military-grade Lunchables. My favorite flavor is vegetable crumbles with pasta and taco-style sauce. One of the hardest parts of getting into the game is the knowledge barrier. I played plenty of games where I felt required to have a wiki open, but with Tarkov I average about 5 tabs. Even if you do read up on the game, you'll probably still die within a few minutes of loading into a map, possibly by elite raider AI with literal aimbot accurate grenades, or a player with a sniper rifle and a thermal scope. This is a game that will absolutely stress you out, and I find myself needing to take frequent breaks so I don't have a stroke. And yet, I keep playing. What this game has going for it is high levels of engagement. You need to turn off your music, turn off your YouTube videos, and give the game your full attention. As far as shooters go, I can't say I've ever had an experience quite like it. The main point of balance in Tarkov is its ammunition. There are dozens of different kinds of ammunition, which is a confusing mess to organize, but they generally come in 3 flavors. Shit, slightly less shit, and actually capable of killing people consistently. At low levels, the ammunition available to you is fairly worthless, and you're going to feel it. Yep, someone's here. Oh. Damn! Once you level up a bit, you can buy better ammo, but the best ammo is always sold out or so expensive that it's going to be a huge chunk of the cost of your loadout. I feel that the game should be a little more open with the differences between ammunition. I understand not wanting to gamify things by adding very specific damage numbers to bullets, but I don't think it's unrealistic to have a basic rating associated with the stopping power and penetration. It could be something as simple as low, medium, or high for each stat. It's just such an important aspect of the game that without looking at giant charts, you'll be scratching your head as to why your enemies can tank an entire magazine to the chest while you die in 2 shots, even though you're both using the same gun and armor. Besides knowledge on what's actually good, there's nothing keeping you from taking in whatever you want to a match. You can bring in a multitude of grenades, a pile of meds, the best guns and armor, and come up against someone who only has a pistol. A lot of engagements are going to feel very one-sided. However, with enough game knowledge, you can overcome players who outgear you. Top-end loadouts can still be countered by cheap guns and bullets if you understand how limb damage works and which parts of the body are actually covered by various armors. Because you aren't very limited with what you can bring in, you have a lot of freedom to play how you want. If you want to carry an SMG and sprint around the map like you're in Call of Duty, you can do that. If you want to sneak around after dark with a silenced pistol and night vision, you can do that too. As far as I can tell, there's really no established way that the game should be played or a best way to play it. But at the end of the day, doing raids is only the precursor to the real game, inventory management. You can put bags inside bags, and to add to the fun, some containers are bigger on the inside than they are on the outside. In Tarkov, having an item does not guarantee you'll be able to find and use it. Another thing to do between raids is modify your weapons. The weapon modding in Tarkov is what I can only describe as guntistic, though that doesn't come as any surprise considering what I've seen of the lead developer. The amount of customizability of these weapons is meant to mimic real life and can be kind of confusing and overwhelming at times. It's not always clear what the difference between two similar parts is, or what some attachments even do. And even with so many guns and attachments in the game already, the developers have said they wanted to add more. They want the game to serve as an encyclopedia of guns. It's just another section in the library of information you'll need to read up on in order to play the game effectively. I personally don't really mess with it too much and just use whatever crappy AK I pull off a scav. So far, my experiences with the Tarkov community have been positive. This might be because the game tends to attract a somewhat older audience. Most of the big Tarkov content creators seem to be 30 plus. I also see a lot of police or military veteran players. I found a lot of very friendly and mature players who are ready to help me learn the game, even going as far as risking their own loot in order to show me around and teach me maps. I do really like the game, and I've talked a lot about what I feel makes it enjoyable, but that doesn't mean I don't have grievances. I'm going to add a disclaimer here. Some people seem to get very upset when you say anything negative about this game. I'd like to remind people that the point of the game being in beta is for the developers to get feedback. The game has problems, and the developers know this. If they didn't, the game wouldn't be in beta. Normally I wouldn't have a problem talking about issues with the game, but to be honest, I'm a little wary of the developers of Tarkov. A while back, they filed takedowns on several YouTube videos claiming the YouTuber was spreading misinformation and negative hype, which sounds a whole lot like the developers got upset that someone was critical about their game. Takedown orders on videos for this kind of thing is a pretty sleazy move, and it feels like a scare tactic to keep people from being critical of the game. They've said they won't do it anymore, but the damage is already done. Content creators are going to avoid saying anything negative because they don't want to risk it. As far as the game itself goes, I worry about future changes. Tarkov has a bit of an identity crisis. I've talked about Chads and Rats, and I think the difference in playstyle really comes down to the type of game that people want to play. The Chads want to play it like a competitive shooter, so the survival elements of keeping up with your food, water, and healing between raids is just kind of an annoyance.
Oh, I'm fucking dehydrating? Are you kidding me? God, this game is so fucking lame. Oh my god, dude, I just want to play the game. All this persistent health and dehydrate. Oh my god.
On the opposite end, for players like me, the resource management is the fun part of the game. At the moment, I think Tarkov does a pretty good job catering to both kinds of players, but I think it could do better. Keep in mind that I'm not a game developer, so I have no idea if these things would work from an overall gameplay perspective, but here it goes. Essentially, I think the game could be split into two games, PMC mode and Scav mode. You can already play as a Scav, but it's just limited to spawning in with a random loadout, and it's gone forever when he dies. I think your Scav should be a second persistent character with his own stash and hideout. Playing as a Scav would be more focused on the survival elements of the game. Scavs would have their own set of traders, with the focus being on bartering rather than outright buying items. You would still be playing on maps with PMCs, who have easier access to higher level gear, so playing as a Scav is generally going to be more difficult. However, this could be balanced by allowing Scavs to choose where they spawn in on the map, or by having more numerous exfil locations. Scavs are supposed to be the original citizens of the city, so it makes sense they would know how to get around quicker. The developers have spoken about adding a feature that sounds like it could be similar to what I'm saying, so I hope they take it in this direction. Different sets of rules for different types of players might be the best way to go. I'm also a bit worried that the developers might be trying to push the game towards something that isn't going to be good for the game's overall health. For example, the developers seem to be unhappy that everyone in the game shoots each other on sight. They want to implement some kind of karma system that punishes people for killing players of their own faction. It is realistic that soldiers would want to get a positive ID on a target before shooting at it, and I think it might create much more dynamic encounters, but from what I've seen, trying to force people to play like this doesn't work and just ends up hurting games. I think General Sam said it best in one of his podcasts when talking about Rust.
I'm like, listen here, fuckers, you're not using the mailboxes or the notes or any of the shit that they gave you. You are just like exclusively
turning it into like another FPS game.
Bow, aka house. I want your house. Like, this is like the most meathead way to approach that game.
It really is. Like, imagine some of the cool shit you could do with the things that are actually in the game, but people aren't really interested.
Tarkov is a game where you can kill other players, even if they're your allies, which means that that's pretty much all people are going to want to do. For example, take Fallout 76, which, at least when I played it, had relatively little PvP. What you could do is find launch codes and detonate a nuke on the map, killing all players in its radius. Regardless of the fact that there was nothing to gain by doing this, people did it so often that it would crash the servers. I feel that in Tarkov, if there is a minor negative consequence to killing other players, people are just going to ignore it. And if there's a major consequence, people are probably going to move to a different game. This could be totally unsubstantiated, but I also feel like the big Tarkov streamers have a lot of sway with the developers. I like that the developers are very active with the community and do podcasts with content creators, but people who play Tarkov for 8+ hours a day don't play the game the same way that the vast majority of people do. So if there are changes to the game that cater to the top 1% of players, it has the potential to make the game worse for the majority of the player base. That, combined with the developers talking about how the game isn't designed to be fun and how it's supposed to be hardcore, makes me feel like they don't really care if they alienate majority of the players. Tarkov is already pretty difficult to get into, and I don't find myself recommending it to a lot of my friends because I don't feel like it's something the average person is going to have the patience for. The next one is kind of a weird complaint, considering how difficult I've talked about the game being, but I feel like it's too easy to make money in the game. It's not uncommon to see people with hundreds of millions of in-game currency. Even though I'm not very good and end up dying a lot, it just seems to not matter most of the time. There's a mechanic called insurance. Before you go into a raid, you can pay a small fee to insure your gear. If you die and no one takes your gear out of the raid, you'll get that gear back. So going in with a relatively cheap loadout almost ensures that you'll get your gear back when you die, because most players aren't going to bother wasting inventory space with cheap guns and armor. This can be abused though. One of the things you can do is throw all your gear into the bushes or a dark corner where no one will find it, and it will make its way back to you after the raid. You can kill one player or scav and take their loadout and hide yours. For the rest of the match, you'll be playing risk-free. I feel like this should be changed by making it so insurance only works if you die. You would still get items back in insurance, but at least you wouldn't be able to make it out of the raid with a full loadout on top of getting all your other stuff back too. There are also Scav Runs. Instead of spawning in with your own gear, you can choose to come into the raids as a scav with a random loadout. If you survive the raid, you can then transfer anything you find on your scav to your main stash. This lets you play the game risk-free while still potentially making a considerable amount of money. I like Scav Runs, and I think it's a good way to relax a little after a tense match with my PMC. However, sometimes you can spawn in as a scav with expensive keys, guns, or other items. When this happens, it feels like the game is just handing me several 100,000 rubles for free, and it kind of diminishes the resource management aspect of the game. An easy way to fix this is just not have the player scav spawn in with keycards and expensive things like that. Make people have to work on their scav and actually get a few kills or loot something to come out with anything valuable. There's also the ability to craft items in your hideout. Usually the resulting product is worth more than its components. I personally feel like this way to make money is probably the most in line with what the game should be. You expend fuel to run your generator in order to craft things, so it's still about resource management. It also takes real time for these things to finish crafting, which promotes players actually jumping back into a match and playing for a while instead of just making all of their money out of raid. The one area I feel like the hideout is overtuned is the Bitcoin mining rig. You have the ability to just keep adding graphics cards to this thing, and eventually it turns into tons of passive income, and you only have to log in once a day and collect your bitcoins. I feel like passive income really isn't in line with the rest of the game. I'm pretty sure in the lore of the game, communications with the outside world are cut off, so I'm not sure how you even have internet access to begin with. Besides that, the concept of physical bitcoins you can loot off things is very strange. I feel like the whole Bitcoin thing was a joke by the developers that somehow made it into the game. I should mention the flea market as a way to make money, but the devs are making some changes in this next patch that should be toning that down, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. As it stands though, people can buy and sell items on the flea market and make a ton of money without actually ever playing the game. I think it's kind of lame, and I'm glad they're changing it. Finally, there's one of the more controversial aspects of the game, the secure container. The container is a section of your inventory that you don't lose when you die. For some things, it's a necessity. For example, there are various locked doors in the game which you need a key to open. These keys are fairly rare and expensive. There are even some quests that require you to open locked doors or carry quest items. Without the secure container, doing some of these things would be an absolute chore. The problem is that it can be abused. Players can spawn in with no equipment, risking nothing, sprint straight to a high loot area, grab whatever stuff they can fit in their container, and just disconnect from the game or die. This is probably the fastest and least risky way to grind out money, and I feel like it undermines a core aspect of the game. It's not a fun way to play, but it's so efficient with making money that there's no wonder why so many people do it. On top of that, it can make maps feel quite empty when half the players suicide or disconnect 2 minutes into the match. Unfortunately, I don't think much will be done to fix the secure container because of the way the game is monetized. The basic edition of the game gives you a 2x2 container, while the more expensive edition of the game gives you a 3x3 container. As you might expect, this has led to some heated debates over if the game is pay to win. On one side, you could say that having more inventory space doesn't really matter. It's not going to improve your awareness or map knowledge or ability to aim. And if this were a more typical MMO like World of Warcraft or something, I would agree that more inventory space is more a matter of convenience than anything else. But with Tarkov, extra inventory space, especially extra space that lets you keep items on death, ends up being more than just convenience. If you have the bigger container, you can safely bring more than twice as many meds and other supplies into the raid, which, needless to say, is an advantage. Some items, especially good meds and ammo, are so expensive that it's not really worthwhile to bring them into the raid unless you can keep them safe in your container. The only thing keeping me from claiming pay to win is the fact that you can earn a bigger secure container later in the game. So by the end game, everyone has the potential to be on more even ground. It still sucks that for the majority of your progression through the game, you're going to be at a disadvantage because you didn't buy the more expensive version. Still, I don't think that the bigger container is a necessity for success. Anyway, between Insurance, Scav Runs, the secure container, and Hideout, I feel like the game is overall too easy when it comes to making money. There does need to be some way for players to get items risk-free, otherwise people would run into the problem of being unable to play the game if they did drain all their resources, but I think that it could be toned down some. I feel like instead of all these ways to make a bunch of money to then buy gear and supplies, the game should be more about finding and using things in raid. Of course, your opinion on this is going to come down to the type of player you are. I imagine that the more PvP-oriented players feel like they should be able to go into every raid with a fully optimized loadout, which the current state of the game makes possible. However, being a more survival-oriented player, I feel like having a full setup of top-tier gear should be a very rare thing, and players should mostly be running around with whatever kit they can slap together from things they've scavenged. There are some bugs and problems with cheaters in the game, and I'm not sure if the game being in beta is much of an excuse considering it's been in beta for about 3 years. Still, Tarkov works fairly well. It runs better and has less bugs than full releases of certain AAA games. I have a very middle-of-the-road computer and I play at about medium settings with no problem. I can also stream it without much issue. The one consistent problem I do have is every once in a while, the game stutters or drops to about 5 frames per second for a few seconds. There are also some sound issues. It can be hard to tell where noises are coming from, especially when you're in a building. Just about everyone I've seen play the game has the same issues too, and the developers are aware of them. They can be annoying, but not so much that I don't want to play the game. The game can also take a long time to load, so it's a good idea to keep it on a solid-state drive. There is a lot of lore about Tarkov, the region it's in, and the various factions in the game, but none of what I've seen in-game directly answers very basic questions. Why is my character there, alone in an underground bunker, being supplied by what I can only imagine are mobsters? If he's a mercenary, why isn't he at a fob somewhere being supplied by his company? If the name of the game is Escape From Tarkov, why is my character so insistent on constantly going deeper into Tarkov? I can't imagine it'd be that difficult to escape. There are people you can pay to drive you places, and even a working train. Or you could even just walk in a direction until you're out of the city. But apparently your character has better things to do, like mine bitcoins. I did a little bit of searching and I found some forum posts by the developers that better explain things. Essentially, your character is a mercenary who is fighting either to hide the secrets of a shady corporation or to expose them, depending on which faction you pick. Conflict in the city escalated to the point where the surrounding area closed off communications and travel, leaving you stranded. And that all sounds good, but what I'd really like to see is the progression system in the game reflecting that story. I will be honest, I haven't read all the quest text in the game. Maybe it goes into more detail about things eventually, but so far what I've seen is really basic MMO quest stuff. Kill 5 scavs to prove your worth, find me some supplies. What I'd like to see is more information up front about who my character is and what he's supposed to be doing. Like I said, there is a lot of lore for the game and even some live-action short films, but they're all outside of the game itself. I think a very basic story could really tie the game together, and it could go something like this. The first time you start up the game, you're greeted with a cinematic of news about the terror group being up to something and how mercenary groups are fighting over it. Then you pick a faction, which leads to a cinematic or single-player segment based on what you choose. If you picked USEC, you're stationed inside the terror group lab to defend it, and if you picked Bear, you start just outside the lab, ready to attack. Either way, you launch into a skirmish with friendly and enemy AI. The scene ends with the player being shot and passing out. Sometime later, you wake up under the care of Therapist. She explains that one of her guys found you and rescued you, and that the rest of your squad is either dead or MIA. She also explains that the city has gone into full lockdown and that you're basically stuck there now. Your first task is to meet Prapor, who shows you the hole in the ground that will now serve as your hideout. He also gives you some starting supplies. In exchange, you have to work for him. That leads into your starter quests, and the game basically just plays as normal from this point on. I think it would be good to start the game with Just Proper, who would serve more as a general store with basic guns, bags, and armor, and you'd also have Therapist, who sells food and meds. You gradually unlock other, more specialized traders as you do more quests and level up. This would give players a better idea of who to buy and sell what to, instead of being overwhelmed by a bunch of traders the moment you start the game. Anyway, at some point early on, one of the NPCs mentions that you might be able to get out of Tarkov if you build a communication array and signal to your faction that you're still alive. So the main goal, story-wise, would be about building up your base and doing tasks for people to get to the point where you can build this communication thing. It could serve as the final upgrade for your hideout. That way, everything you're doing is leading to that endpoint of finishing your hideout. Once you do finally complete it, you open communications with your faction, and they tell you that an extraction team is on the way. At that point, congratulations, you've escaped from Tarkov. Of course, you can just continue playing as normal at that point, but the campaign of the game would be complete. If the story of the game is structured in this sort of way, it doesn't really get in the way of people who just want to PvP, but at the same time, it offers some context for what you're doing in the game for people who care about that sort of thing. Overall, I think Tarkov is a great game with a lot of potential. At this point, even though it's not finished and there are some rough edges, I still think it's worth buying. There's a lot of gameplay you can get out of it. You're going to be stressed out when playing it, especially at first, but that's kind of the fun of it. You're also going to need to spend a lot of time doing research into various aspects of the game to really understand how everything works. If I only had one issue, it's that I'm concerned about the future of the game. I feel like feature creep is a big problem, and it makes me kind of doubt that this game will ever have a full release. I also feel like the developers might try to force people into playing a specific way, when right now one of the strengths of the game is that you can play however you want. Anyway, that's about all I have to say about Escape from Tarkov. This has been a long video, and that's because this is the first game in a while that's really inspired me to talk this much. This is also kind of a new format for me. I haven't really done a long game review in about 4 years. So please tell me if you liked this video and would like to see more stuff like this from me. Thank you for watching, and you have a wonderful day.